pleasure to introduce Mike Kelly, President and CEO. Thank you, Mike, for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
All right. So maybe for those in our audience who may not be as familiar with the NervGen story, can you just give us a brief overview of NervGen and what you're currently working on?
Sure. So we're a clinical stage biotech company, an emerging clinical stage biotech company, I should say. We are based in Vancouver, public on the TSXV, and we have two programs. So our first program, NVG-291, as you mentioned, is in spinal cord injury, and we are having a phase 1b/2a data readout next quarter. And our next program, NVG-300, is a little bit earlier stage, and we'll have a readout this quarter in the preclinical models for ALS and stroke. So the company is working on neuroreparative therapies.
Okay, great. And maybe also, can you just provide some background about yourself and how you chose to join NervGen?
Sure. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for 30 years, started out on the commercial side of the business with big company like TAP Pharmaceuticals. And then I jumped out into the world of startup with companies like Guilford and Pharma, and then got to pure startups, which are Azure and Adapt in the spec pharma space. But over the last couple of jobs that I've had, I worked at the C-suite level at a company called Covis, as well as my last job. I worked with a group of the founders for a company called Adapt, where we launched Narcan nasal spray in US and Canada. That was a very gratifying job, which led me to NervGen. Actually, why NervGen? The technology, the people, the board, and the opportunity to help a lot of people. I met Jerry Silver early on in the interview process, and Jerry recently passed, but Jerry's a pioneer in this space. He's a scientist who discovered our lead molecule, NVG-291. He's been working in spinal cord injury. He worked in spinal cord injury his entire career, and he was a great teacher. So he got me very excited about this technology and how it can apply to multiple different diseases that have significant unmet medical need. Then I met the board, I met the management team, and I felt that, I can help this company move forward pretty rapidly and get to commercialization.
All right. Thank you. That's a super impressive background. And I had the pleasure of speaking to Jerry. So
yeah, he's a great gentleman.
Maybe just to dig in a little bit more in detail on NVG-291, can you talk about how it was discovered and how it works?
Sure. Actually, Mark DePaul could probably explain a lot better. He's actually on our staff here at NervGen, but he worked in Jerry's lab and he was on the team that actually discovered it. But Jerry made a series of discoveries throughout his career, but several of them led to understanding why nerves don't repair when there's a traumatic event like a spinal cord injury. And they're all centered around a group of molecules called CSPGs, chondroitin sulfate proteoglycans. So they are the molecules that basically protect and hold your central nervous system intact. They're the cement that holds everything together. But when there's damage, they are actually they collect in the glial scar that is formed around the injury, and they inhibit repair. They inhibit regeneration, remyelination, and plasticity. And what Jerry did after making that discovery was the team started to look at ways to stop those inhibitors from inhibiting. And that's what led to NVG-291. They designed it after the intracellular wedge domain of a receptor that the CSPGs attach to, and disrupt the signaling into the cell. So we know all of the biological processes that are stopped or that are actually turned back on because we're inhibiting the inhibitor. So it has been demonstrated, and Jerry's demonstrated this pretty broadly in a lot of his publications, that once NVG-291 enters into that process, nerves can actually regenerate again. So the body's natural mechanisms can take back over. You can remyelinate, you can regenerate, and you can enhance plasticity. We are now taking it to the next level and doing a lot of work to understand the molecular mechanisms that are what those specific signals are that we're turning back on.
Okay, great. And as we look ahead to your first human proof of concept study results, the phase 1b/2a study in spinal cord injury, can you maybe provide some background around the market opportunity for spinal cord injury?
Yeah, it's a pretty large market. There's, in the United States, there's roughly 18,000 cases per year of spinal cord injury. There's a group of 300,000 people living in the U.S. With spinal cord injury. And when we talk to patients, payers, and physicians, there's really nothing for these folks. They in an instant, they have an injury, they're hospitalized, they have surgery to decompress the injury, and then they're on rehab paths, right? They do inpatient rehab, outpatient rehab, but there's nothing to help regenerate nerves. And they do get better to a certain extent, and they plateau right around 9 to 12 months, and then that's kind of where they are for the rest of their lives. So if we can actually show that we can turn back on the repair and make those connections and give some function back. We talked to payers, and payers said that they would treat us as an orphan type of drug. And if you take orphan type medicines and look at the prices that they're garnering in the marketplace, multiplied by the incidence and prevalence numbers I gave you, it's a multi-billion-dollar market opportunity. In fact, each case costs this system in the U.S. between $1 and $4 million over the course of the life of the patient. And, obviously it's a broad range, but it depends on the severity of the injury and the age that the injury was occurred.
Okay. And then, can you walk us through the trial design?
Yeah. So we're studying two main things here. The primary endpoint is to measure connectivity, right? So we've chosen Shirley Ryan Ability Labs as our partner. Monica Perez specifically, she's the PI, and Monica is an expert in measuring that connection. She's an expert in electrophysiology. So we're actually measuring the electric current going from the brain past the site of injury to sensors on the hand and the leg. So the patients need to have a baseline measurement to get into the study, and then they're stratified into drug or placebo, and they go through an exercise routine, and we're measuring the improvement in the strength of that signal over the course of 12 weeks. So it's a 12-week treatment, daily subcutaneous injections, and then we're following for an additional 4 weeks, so it's out to 16 weeks, to see can we improve the strength of that signal, and it's called the MEP amplitude, or can we improve the speed of that signal? So that's the primary endpoint. And it's like a biomarker for spinal cord injury. It takes a lot of heterogeneity out of this patient population, which makes it very homogeneous, and it's a very objective endpoint. And then all of the secondary endpoints are functional. So they're like 10-minute walk time, 9-hole peg test, upper and lower extremity motor scores, pitch, grasp, all things that are very important to patients as far as functional improvement. So we're measuring that combination, improvement of signals and improvement of function. And the goal here is to show that we can improve signals, and that improvement in signals is actually resulting in some type of improved function.
Okay, great. So it sounds like a large opportunity. You have a well-designed trial. Anything you can share with us on the patient demographics that you've enrolled in terms of age, duration of disease, and nature of the initial injury?
Yeah, so there's actually two arms to this study, right? The first arm is what we're calling the chronic cohort. And that means people who've met that plateau that I talked about earlier. So their injury occurred between 1 and 10 years ago. And Dan Michael, our chief medical officer, presented some data earlier this year, I think on the first 10 to 15 patients. And it's roughly the mean time post-injury has been, right around 3 years, give or take. We won't know the final numbers until the rest of the cohort was fully enrolled. So the first cohort is the chronic cohort. And the average age is very typical to the average age of spinal cord injury. Early 40s, 43 is the average age of a spinal cord injury patient. This, recent data. And this is mostly men, 70 plus percentage of the time it's men. And, most of these injuries are occurring 70 plus percent of the time due to a fall, or, some type of accident.
Okay. And then what is the natural course of the disease that, for example, at 3 years, have most of these patients plateaued in terms of their recovery?
Yeah, they have. And that's important because we don't expect to see any placebo effect here. Once folks hit that plateau, very few folks continue to improve. I'm not saying that all folks, there is a small percentage that continue to push themselves to make connections and try different types of therapies or stimulation to continue to make and push those connections. But the majority of the population at, that 9 to 12 months has plateaued, and there is very little improvement in motor skills after that.
Okay, understood. And you described a number of endpoints. Can you walk us through what in your vision successful outcomes would look like in terms of the primary endpoints and maybe some of the key secondary endpoints?
Yeah, absolutely. So the primary endpoint, the study was designed to meet the primary endpoints, which is the electric connections. So Dan worked with Monica and her team to look at actual MEP amplitudes and the changes in MEP amplitudes in some of the stimulation studies that they conducted. And they got to an N of 8 per arm. We bumped that up to an N of 10 per arm. So there's 20 people in this study to measure that primary endpoint, and we expect to see an improvement in connectivity. That's the first thing we'd like to see. The second thing we'd like to see is improvement in function. Obviously, when we meet with the FDA for an end of phase 2 meeting, we have to pick a functional endpoint moving forward, right? So we'd like to see some type of improvement in function. We have so many different secondary endpoints in this study, and the goal here is to take the primary endpoint, combine it with what we see in trends in the secondary endpoint, and just give us the ability to pick an endpoint for a larger study that we can conduct in phase 3. So, some of the examples of those would be, as I mentioned earlier, there's a score called GRASP, there's pinch force, there's 9-hole peg test, which is a progressive functional endpoint. There's 10-minute walk time for folks who can actually do a 10-meter walk test, or 10-meter walk test, not 10-minute walk time, 10-meter walk test, and then upper and lower extremity motor functions, so which are composite functions of the upper extremities and the lower extremities to see, is there any functional improvement over time? And we're measuring all of these endpoints at week 1 as a baseline, and then 2, 4, 8, and 12 to see, do these progress? So the goal here is to see statistical significance in the primary, and then separation and trends, strong trends in the secondary. That would be the first time ever in science that any company has ever proven that they can actually remake connections and turn those connections into some type of functional improvement. So we would be well onto phase 3 at that point.
Okay, well, that's an exciting landmark on the horizon to watch for. Can you give us some idea of the timing when we should expect to see that proof of concept data?
Yeah, we're telling folks, well, the last patient was entered the study December 31st of last year. It's a 16-week trial. And then we need, roughly 6 weeks to gather the data, clean the data, lock the database, and start our analysis. So we're looking, in Q2 in the May-June timeframe.
All right. We'll look forward to that. And then I guess as you look out on the horizon beyond that study readout, can you talk about when you could get your end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA, and maybe any initial thoughts on what on a phase 3 study design could look like, especially in terms of number of patients and duration of the study?
Yeah, sure. So our goal is to meet with the FDA this year. If we get readout in June, we should be able to pull the package together and submit an end of phase 2 request to the FDA. And that's our target, is to do that this year. Then part of that proposal would be the proposal to conduct a phase 3 in chronic. We still are conducting the study in subacute, but if we have positive data in chronic, our regulatory consultants are saying, don't wait. Take the chronic data, go to the FDA, continue on with the subacute as a confirmatory study. That will just answer if we treat earlier in the disease process, does one cohort work better than the other? But if we have positive in chronic, we'll meet with the FDA at the end of this year. The designs that we're planning right now are roughly 200 patients, 20 to 30 centers across the U.S. We'll pick a functional endpoint, and the goal would be to kick that off and get that off the ground in the first quarter, first half of next year.
Okay. And then looking out beyond that, when would you expect that study to read out and potentially file?
Yeah. Well, our plans right now are to submit an NDA in 2028. That's the goal. It really is going to be heavily dependent upon enrollment. We think that if we show positive results here, it shouldn't be too challenging to get folks into a larger phase 3. If we have roughly 20 to 30 centers across the U.S. and we need 200 patients, we just did 20 patients at Shirley Ryan in a little over a year. So, folks could do the math and figure out how quickly we can get this study done. Then it's a matter of pulling all of the package together. We hired a head of tech ops last year who's got our CMC world wired, because most companies of our stage, that's where they fall down. And we brought in an expert who is now manufacturing and working on our plans for manufacturing the future. We have teed up all of our plans to continue all of our tox work, so that we can put that into the package as well as what I mentioned earlier. We're still doing a lot of preclinical work to understand the specific molecular mechanism, and all of that is going to plan on going into the package that we'll submit to the FDA. So the team is working on all fronts to be prepared to submit an NDA in 2028, but obviously there's a lot of assumptions that go into that timing.
Okay, so assuming that you file for regulatory approval in 2028, you could potentially be commercially available on the market in 4 years or so from now.
That's the plan.
All right.
That's the plan. Yeah. And that's what excited me the most about joining this organization. I know the size of commercial organization we need to build here. I've built commercial organizations that are much larger than what we need to launch this product. And I think, a small company like ours can actually hit these timelines and get this done very quickly. So that's what excites everybody who's joined this organization.
Okay. How many sales professionals would you need to commercialize 291?
Yeah, I think you probably only need like 25 sales reps across the U.S. I mean, these folks find their ways to the traumatic experts who treat spinal cord injury, right? And if you can target those experts, which are 25 to 35 centers across the United States, you're going to be hitting majority of the market and majority of cases. And so we're using that plan to actually target for our clinical phase 3 program. So most of these folks are going to be familiar with the drug by the time we launch it. And this is not that sales forces aren't important, but this will be, upon successful data, this will be a breakthrough in medicine that will be a pretty simple PR campaign as combined with a sales organization and a market access team that could really help explain to payers the importance of paying for something like this. We have all of that, going for us, as well as, we're linked to a lot of the patient advocacy groups that are in this area. They're all cheering for us. We work for them. Wings for Life has been fantastic. They've actually are funding a third of our current clinical trial. And they're doing great work. We've partnered with educational initiatives with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. So there's a lot of, it's a very small community and a very small patient population, and a huge unmet medical need.
All right. Well, it sounds like you've done a lot of the groundwork already, and potentially this is relatively manageable independently by NervGen. You don't need a partner necessarily. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, I don't think we need a partner to access spinal cord injury. We will need a partner to look at some of the bigger indications that this product could potentially work on. That's one of the reasons we're looking at NVG 300, which is our next generation molecule that's in preclinical development, and we're studying stroke and ALS. Now we would, that's where, we need some big money to look at other different disease states, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, stroke. Those are big markets, big clinical programs. So we're in discussions with a lot of different bigger partners on those types of indications. We're also in discussions with folks who are interested in spinal cord injury, but our plan is, raise capital and continue executing our plan. If a partner comes in and can do something faster and get it to patients sooner, then we'll have discussions.
Okay, makes sense. And then what about outside the U.S. or outside North America, I should say?
Yeah, we're right now we're resource constrained. We have looked at Europe. Obviously, our phase 3 will include Canada and the U.S. But we've looked at Europe, and we've talked to several different groups in Europe as well as Asia. We're not sure right now whether we want a regionalized partner or whether we want a global partner on an indication perspective. But all of that's on the table, and a lot of it, I think, will be accelerated once we have this data readout and once folks see that now we're past the proof of concept stage in humans. Those partnership discussions will go from dancing to maybe some type of wedding. Okay.
All right. So maybe shifting gears over to the financial side of the business. Can you just talk about NervGen's cash burn?
Yeah. So our last reported September, we had $15 million in cash in the U.S. dollars. We're burning just a little over, $1 million a month. So that takes us through 2025. We know that we're going to have to do a raise to execute our plans moving forward. So Bill Adams and I, who's CFO, have been on the road talking to many investors. This company has taken a pretty interesting path. It's not your typical venture-backed U.S. biotech. The company went public very early in its life cycle. Harold Punnett, who's the founder, Harold actually met with Jerry Silver and in-licensed the technology out of Case Western. And a group of investors in Vancouver, and Harold took the company public. In 2016 or 2017, he founded the company. So it was a different path than most U.S. investors are used to. But the Canadian markets have been very, very kind to us, and we have a huge following in the retail setting. We also have several institutional investors in Canada that have jumped in, and we did a raise last year of $23 million Canadian bought deal, which really helped us get to this point. But we know moving forward, we're going to have to rely on, typically, more retail as well as institutional investors. And that's why, Bill and I are on the road talking to as many people as we can, telling them the story to get our name in front of folks, because we're not a well-known entity in the U.S. markets right now.
Okay, great. That's super helpful background. And then I guess as you look ahead to, I guess, how far does your current cash runway extend? And then you have some potentially significant expenses ahead for a phase.
Yeah, we have enough cash to get us through a minimum this year into next year. And we'll have, the NVG300 readout this quarter, the NVG291 proof of concept in humans, spinal cord injury next quarter. So we think post data announcement, we're going to be in a good position to, top off of our treasury. But obviously, development companies are always raising money. We're always raising money. And we always find investors, and investors are finding us now. It was very tough slogging early on. But now that we're getting close to a readout, our phone is ringing rather than us picking up the phone calling folks.
Okay. Do you, I guess, I think you mentioned this briefly, but just a rough idea of how much the phase 3 study will cost?
Yeah, the phase 3 study, we're estimating that the phase 3 study specifically will cost, roughly $45 million, somewhere in that range. If we want to advance NVG300, obviously, you look at the typical IND enabling studies, you need several $1 million for those as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we can't forget about technical operations, manufacturing, and making sure that we're wired for all of those things. So we think, the number to get us to an NDA, you could probably take that $45 million and double it, and that gets us to the NDA point. But yeah, we're in a pretty good position, I think, right now with our capital. We don't need money at this stage, but we will be in a position where we do need money when we get this readout, and we want to sit down with the FDA to conduct an end of phase 2 meeting and design that phase 3.
Okay, makes sense. Now, you've mentioned NVG300. Your plans are to go into ALS and stroke. Can you just talk a little bit about the background of NVG300?
Yeah, we've kind of kept NVG300, and we're going to continue to keep it a little bit close to the vest because it's an internally discovered molecule. It'll qualify. It'll be a biologic, and right now we've conducted one spinal cord injury study last year. It was successful, so we're doing a confirmatory spinal cord injury study. But we're branching off and looking at stroke and ALS because we don't necessarily need a backup in spinal cord injury. We need to explore new fertile ground in the neuroreparative space. So that's why we've picked stroke and ALS. But yeah, we will announce the data sometime this quarter in stroke and ALS, and I think that'll really kind of be the catalyst, the coming out party for NVG300. But like any other development company and a small company like ours, you got to keep it close to the vest from a competitive perspective, but you got to show a little bit to the investment community so that they can fund it. And that's kind of the position we're in right now. But we feel strong. We've filed all the patents around it, and we're going to be in a very strong position as we announce data here towards the end of Q1.
All right, excellent. Well, we'll look forward to learning more about NVG300, and then I guess just near-term next steps for NVG291.
Near-term next steps is this data readout. I mean, we just announced our first patient in for subacute. So near term, we'll be operationalizing getting patients into the subacute cohort. We're well on our way. We're we've got a significant amendment passed through IRB last year, which loosened the entry criteria a little bit, which basically made the window between 20 and 90 days post-injury, which helps. Now we can get people inpatient as well as people who are leaving inpatient going to outpatient rehab. And obviously, Shirley Ryan is a very large attractant to outpatient rehab. So we're going to continue to advance subacute. From a chronic perspective, it's just a matter of now making sure that our data management team is wired. And they've been meeting daily, I can tell you, to make sure that when the last data point, last day of the last patient in is complete, majority of the data is already in the database. And so we have a very short window between that point in time, locking the database and announcing to the world in the upcoming months. So we have a very busy 4 months ahead of us here for the announcement in Q2.
Okay, well, we're looking forward to that. We're just about out of time. Is there anything else you'd like investors to know about NervGen before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of the largest opportunities in CNS, and we're going to know in the first half of this year. So just keep an eye out for NervGen. We're an up and coming company, and we're going to have a huge data readout coming up here.
All right. Super exciting. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on the impressive work you're doing at NervGen. It's great to see you, Mike.
Thanks, Jay. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.